5 girls stood in the upstairs hallway of the Worth home, pleading with their host to join them in the bathroom. "It's only a game," the other girls egged her on. "I don't know," Elizabeth replied with eyes averted. "It's a silly game to scare you. Come on, please." One girl interjected named Alice. Elizabeth thought really hard this time. She'd been friends with Alice for years, so she was the only reason she'd even considered doing a scary game like this. "No one's ever been hurt doing this?" "No, Liz, I promise you it's safe. You know it's just a goofy urban legend. Come on." She bit her lip for a moment, slowly giving in to her friend. "Okay, let's do it." Before long, the 5 girls had crowded in the upstairs bathroom with the lights off. Some giggled while others fidgeted around. Alice turned on the flashlight to her phone and aimed it into the mirror. "All right, girls, we have to say it at the same time, okay? Everyone ready?" All girls nodded their heads in unison. The light on Alice's phone danced around the bathroom as they spun in circles 3 times, chanting Bloody Mary with each turn. They stopped, some giggling even more from the dizziness, and tried to be still as they gazed into the mirror. "I don't see anything," one girl whined. "You have to wait," Alice hissed back. They all waited in eager anticipation, and soon were all very quiet. Elizabeth was on the verge of running away, but tried her best to be brave in front of her friends. "Wait, did you see that?" another girl stated, sounding quite serious. "Shut up, you don't see anything," another chastised. "No, really, I think I see something." "You're not getting me with that. Can we go now? Just wait." After another moment of silence, then, "I see it!" a girl screamed in, making them all jump and run out of the room. All 5 girls were soon back in Elizabeth's room, huddled together. "All right, enough with the ruckus. Go to bed, girls." The voice of Liz's father bellowed through the door. At this, they got very quiet and whispered among themselves. "What did you see?" "I saw a woman behind us, a 6th person." "No, you didn't." "I swear I did." They all chatted on into the night, save for Elizabeth. She indeed saw something, but did not tell the others. Unlike the other girls, she did not see something bombastic or interesting. There was no other woman in the room with them during the game. What she saw was so subtle that no one would take note of it. Right before the other girls screamed and ran out of the bathroom, she was focused on her own reflection. Scared as she was, she only focused on her sullen, terrified face. And that was when she first saw her reflection doing something that she wasn't. Whatever the other thing in the mirror was, it was smiling back at her. In the upcoming days, their shared hysteria was a popular topic among other things. Yet Liz remained quiet as she had been avoiding her own reflection during this time. It was only for a brief moment, but she knew whatever looked like her in the mirror wasn't her. After a week, the incident slowly slipped out of her mind, and she chalked it up to being caught up in the moment. So she started using mirrors as she couldn't avoid them forever, anyway. While brushing her hair in the bathroom, the lights flickered and she took a deep breath. Everything appeared normal, so she continued brushing her hair until her reflection began acting of its own volition. Stunned, she watched in silence as her reflection actually stepped out of view so that she no longer had a reflection at all. "This isn't happening," she said to herself. "It's not real. It's not. What's going on?" A voice startled her from the hallway. "Everything all right, Liz?" Her father was peeking in through the crack of the door. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just talking to myself." "Okay." "Weirdo," he chuckled and went about his way. She looked back to see that her reflection was normal again, as if it just snapped back into place. For the next 2 weeks, Elizabeth couldn't see her reflection without something strange happening. Even at school, her reflection would smile at her, wave, or taunt her in some manner. It was always worse at home, and one night the strange doppelganger had started trying to communicate with her. "What do you want?" The entity put her head into her hands and began crying. Elizabeth watched in confusion as this thing had only terrorized her so far, and now it was crying. Maybe it was some poor spirit that was trapped somehow. Did something happen to you? Her reflection did not respond, but she saw something forming in its hands. Soon its hands were covered in a red substance, and the reflection lifted her head to reveal blood trickling from its eyes. She suppressed a scream, and her doppelganger began writing on the mirror with its blood-soaked fingertips. "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary" was written across the mirror now. "Please, leave me alone." she yelled, not caring if her parents heard. It shook its head, then wrote even more. You asked for it, it wrote. No. The door banging made her jump, and her father's voice called from outside the door. Liz, what's wrong? It's okay, I slipped, that's all. Are you all right? Can you open the door? To keep her father from worrying anymore, she unlocked the door and turned back to the mirror to see that everything was normal once again. Her father put his hand on her shoulder and looked at her intently. Are you sure everything's all right? You've been acting strange lately? It really is okay, Dad. Just being a teenager. Yeah, I'll say. Keep the strange to a minimum if you can, okay? He kissed her forehead and began to walk away when he stopped. Hey, Liz? Does this have anything to do with that game you and the girls were playing? Huh? That? Oh, no. Just some stupid kids game. She walked out into the hallway to join him, and just as she was leaving the bathroom, she saw her reflection out of the corner of her eye. It was wagging its finger at her with a malevolent shark grin. The next day, Liz came home and was getting ready for a night out with her friends. As much as she hated it, she needed the large mirror in her hallway bathroom to prepare. Everything was normal until she started putting on lipstick. Out of nowhere, her reflection threw down the lipstick and stared angrily at her. Frozen, she could only watch as her doppelganger stormed over to the reflection of her bathroom door and slam it shut, and her actual door slammed shut. What are you doing? She pleading tone was laced with dread. Whatever this thing had in store for her, it wasn't good. Her reflection returned to its position across from her and glared intently. Suddenly, the light in the room shifted from a soft white to a sickening red hue. The awfulness in Liz's stomach churned, and it took most of her strength not to get sick. A heavy, unexplainable weight pressed on her, and she struggled to catch her breath. The doppelganger pulled its arm back and struck the mirror from its side. A large crack appeared, and the entity reached into the shattered glass from her world and methodically pulled out a jagged sliver. The two locked eyes as the reflection began slicing something into its arm. A burning sensation started in Elizabeth's arm, but she was too afraid to look away from her twin. When it was done with its awful act, the entity held its arm up for Elizabeth to see. With the words in reverse, she wasn't sure what it said at first. To her shock, she needed only to look at her own arm to see what the thing had written. Bloody Mary. She tried to open the bathroom door, but it was held in place by an unseen force. Thinking quickly, she grabbed a plunger and used the wooden handle to jab at the mirror. With the crunch of the glass, she heard a pain-filled shriek. She quickly began destroying the rest of the mirror and was finally able to open the door again. Out in the hallway, it felt like a completely different space. It wasn't heavy or oppressive, and she could breathe normally again. Once she regained her composure, she knew what she had to do. Going out to her father's shed, she retrieved his hammer and spent the next 20 minutes destroying every mirror in her home. Her parents came home hours later to find her asleep in her bed from exhaustion. Before even waking her, they saw the words carved on her arm and were immediately distressed. Elizabeth tried to make up a story about why she did it, knowing they would never believe. They could tell she was lying and questioned her relentlessly until she told them the truth. Seeing that she was being truthful about something so impossible, they had her evaluated at a nearby psyche ward. She felt betrayed, being punished for telling the truth. Yet Elizabeth's strange demise did not end there. The young girl was actually relieved after she arrived at the psychiatric hospital, as she realized that there would be no mirrors available for patient safety. She thought it actually may be the only solution to her dilemma. Yet she could not account for the darkness of man. A new orderly had started his job there, one who reveled in messing with other people's minds. This deviant learned of Elizabeth's story and her strange fear, and so had an easy way to get a reaction out of her. While the poor girl slept under heavy medication, he put a small mirror in her cell. He watched and waited for her to wake up, his phone ready to live stream the entire sick act. While making others miserable was a hobby of his, being internet famous was even more important. This was the perfect storm for him to achieve both of his goals. Yet he could not have prepared himself for what happened that day. The entire event was caught on his phone as he never stopped the live stream. The watchers of the video detailed a young girl in her cell waking up to a mirror in front of her. She began screaming at the sight, yelling for someone to get it out of her cell. The laughs of the orderly could be heard, followed by the awful comments degrading the poor girl as they were unaware of the girl's condition. Others commented for the orderly to stop, understanding that this was not an ordinary girl. The orderly responded only with jokes and scoffs, callous as he was. That is, until things got out of hand. In the video, the young girl could be seen levitating off the ground with no explanation. The orderly and audience replied in a state of shock and awe, and the girl dropped to the ground. The orderly dashed to the poor girl's cell, swearing the entire way there. His focus was no longer on speaking to his audience, as he realized that he may have cost himself his job and the safety of his patient. He arrived at the girl's cell and dropped his phone as he tended to Elizabeth. Somehow, the phone landed so that the rest of the events could be seen. It was strangely convenient, and many speculate that the whole incident was staged, yet police reports would state otherwise. As the orderly tended to the girl, a form began to appear in the mirror. A red haze began to glow as a woman came into view. The red light caught the attention of the orderly, and he gasped in shock at the sight. The woman had long, flowing black hair and blood streaming from her eyes. "Who are you?" the man screamed, his eyes bulging out in terror. "Oh, I think you know," the woman replied, and went into peals of dark, horrible laughter. The laughter went on for an uncomfortable amount of time when the woman let out a shrieking, awful scream. The mirror exploded into shards of glass, and the orderly turned to shield himself with his arm. When it was over, the orderly looked back in disbelief and mumbled to himself. It was silent for a moment. Then the patient stood up behind the orderly, who was completely unaware. The girl's hair covered most of her face, and all that could be seen was a devious grin and the glint of something sharp in her hand. Comments flooded the video for the orderly to look behind him, but they could only watch on in horror. Without warning, the patient grabbed the orderly from behind and pulled his head back. The last moments of the video saw the orderly drop to the ground, incapacitated, as the female patient quietly exited the cell. The video was quickly taken down, as it was no longer a form of entertainment, but evidence of a horrible event. Police reports say that after Elizabeth left the cell, it was unknown how she managed to get out of the hospital. With all the security monitors, she was never revealed exiting the ward or the building. The door to her cell opened that last time, as if by some invisible force. Even stranger was after the police did a sweep of the psyche ward. In the staffing area was a small bathroom with a mirror. The shard of glass that incapacitated the orderly was found resting on the sink, and the mirror was at a strange angle, as if it had been disturbed. To this day, Elizabeth has never been seen again. My husband, I'll call him C, and I just bought our first home a few months ago. We were so excited. We got a great deal because the homeowners were eager to sell. Our friend, an inspector, made sure everything was in top shape. He noted that the roof needed replacing, and the homeowners promptly had it done before we went under contract. I wondered why they were so eager to leave. To paint a better picture, they were asking $395,000, but sold us the home for $300,000. C joked that maybe the house was haunted, but we didn't care about that, having just moved from an apartment built in 1890 that was originally the town morgue. Finally, we met the sellers to go over a few details of the home. The wife, Alice, was impeccably dressed in J. Crew from head to toe, with long, beautiful curly blonde hair and charm bracelets that jingled. Her husband, James, was super shy and didn't talk much. He was about 6 feet tall, extremely thin, almost skeletal, bald, and wore round, thick, black-framed glasses and a sweater vest. He let Alice take the lead in showing us the home, but stayed close by with a smile on his face. At the end of the meeting, Alice walked us outside to our car. After wishing us luck on our new venture, she mentioned in the same breath that they were moving because James was sick. We felt so bad for them, realizing they took such a financial hit to leave their home. With how frail James looked and not having a single hair on his face or head, we could only assume he had cancer. Fast forward 2 months and I had finally unpacked the last box. C and I were finally feeling settled in. C travels for work 3 weeks out of the month, which has always worked for us. I enjoy the alone time, and we cherish the moments we have together. Thunderstorm nights make me miss him though, and I can't watch any scary movies by myself, knowing he won't be home to sleep with me. One day, while C was out of town, I was at home folding laundry in the living room. As I got up to grab a basket, I noticed someone standing at the front door. I couldn't see who it was because of the marbled glass, and I hadn't heard a knock or the doorbell. I quickly walked to my room to wait out the solicitor. Then I remembered that one of our neighbor's sons was supposed to be going around the neighborhood selling something for school. So I walked to the front door, but no one was there. I shrugged it off. 2 days later, I was watching a movie, getting ready to fall asleep when I heard our garage door open. I quickly reached for my gun and followed my dog to the laundry room to peek into the garage. I opened the door, gun in front of me, and searched the garage. Nothing. I looked outside and saw a car driving away down the street. It seemed far-fetched, but I decided to ask my neighbors across the street if I could check their camera footage. Unfortunately, their cameras weren't working. I told C about what was happening, and when he came back in town, he put motion sensor cameras all around our house and quickly installed our Ring doorbell camera. We also took a trip to the gun range for target practice. He left town again the following week. All went smoothly until the last night of C's work trip. I was laying in bed and saw through my closed blinds all the motion light detectors go off one by one in our backyard, and then my dog jumped up right as someone started to jiggle our back door handle. I once again grabbed my and said to myself, I'm done with this shit. I'm gonna figure out what's going on. I call the cops first, and they write it off as kids because of the neighborhood I live in, but assure me they will send a unit out. I can't wait. I go through the side door and enter our backyard. The motion light next to me turns on, and I look across the yard by the back door. There's a man standing in the shadows. He doesn't move an inch, hence why the motion lights are not on around him, but I could see the outline of his body, tall and slender. Then I could see a shimmer, glasses. I yell out, I am armed and police are on the way, so I suggest you don't make any sudden movements. The motion light next to me turns off. It's damn near pitch black outside, but I hear footsteps in the grass. I again yell, I have a gun, and I will shoot if you come near me. Footsteps stop. I wave my hand to set off the motion detector. Light comes on. It's James, the original owner, standing 20 feet from me, smiling. I say, James, are you okay? What are you doing here? No response. Only smile. As my mind races on what to do, I hear the gate open behind me and footsteps. I spin around, gun pointed, to see Alice. I say, what the fuck is going on? As she raises her hands in a surrendering fashion, she says, I am so sorry. I saw James's car was gone and knew he would try to come here. James has early onset Alzheimer's. We moved so we could be somewhere more secluded without as much neighborhood traffic, and I just didn't realize he would have an issue with the move. Cops showed up. I told them everything was fine. I told Alice I can't handle her husband showing up at my house anymore, and she assured me it wouldn't happen again. James still likes to visit at night. Side note, I have a relative with Alzheimer's and understand how devastating the disease is, and this whole situation is so sad. But as a woman living alone the majority of the time, hell nah. It was a cold, windy night in November. The kind of night where the wind howls through the trees, making them creak and groan like they're alive. I was alone in the house. My parents had gone out for the evening, and my older brother was at a friend's house. They wouldn't be back until late, so it was just me, the silence, and the unsettling noises the old house made in the dark. I was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket and a bowl of popcorn, watching a movie to pass the time. I'd turned off all the lights except for the flickering glow of the TV, which cast eerie shadows on the walls. I tried not to think about how quiet it was, how empty the house felt, but the creaking and groaning of the house made it hard to ignore. Then I heard it, a faint sound, just outside the window. I froze, the remote slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The noise was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced by the steady thrumming of my heartbeat in my ears. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind or maybe a stray cat, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I forced myself to keep watching the movie, trying to lose myself in the familiar story. But then I heard it again, a soft, scraping sound, like metal against wood. This time, it was coming from the back door. I muted the TV and strained to listen, every muscle in my body tense. The scraping turned into a quiet, persistent rattle as if someone was trying to pick the lock. I felt a chill run down my spine. My mind raced. Should I call my parents? The police? My phone was in the kitchen and I'd have to cross the dark hallway to get to it. I crept off the couch, moving as silently as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the hallway, the rattling stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. I held my breath, listening for any sign of movement. Then a soft thud echoed through the house. Someone was inside. Panicking, I darted into the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. As I pressed the phone to my ear, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm and steady, a lifeline in the darkness. There's someone in my house, I whispered, my voice trembling. Please, send help. I could hear the intruder moving closer, the floorboards creaking under their weight. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but I didn't know how long it would take. I needed to hide. I slipped into the pantry, there pulling the door closed just as the footsteps entered the kitchen. Through the slats, I could see a dark figure moving around, searching for something. I clamped a hand over my mouth, trying to stifle my breathing. The intruder moved methodically, opening cupboards and drawers, the clinking of silverware and the thud of doors slamming shut, filling the silence. I prayed they wouldn't check the pantry, that they'd take whatever they wanted and leave. But then the door creaked open, and I found myself staring into the eyes of a masked figure. I screamed, dropping my phone. The operator's voice echoed from the floor, but I couldn't make out the words. The intruder lunged at me, and I scrambled backwards, my hand closing around a can of soup. Without thinking, I hurled it at their head. The can connected with a sickening thud, and the intruder staggered, giving me a moment to escape. I bolted from the pantry, tearing through the house and out the front door. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's house, where I banged on the door, sobbing and gasping for breath. The police arrived minutes later, lights flashing and sirens wailing. They found the intruder unconscious in the kitchen, the mask still on their face. I later learned they'd been a wanted criminal, breaking into homes in the area. That night changed me. The house never felt the same. Its comforting creaks and groans now sounded like threats, and I never forgot the terror of seeing those eyes in the dark, the feeling of being hunted in my own home. I've always hated the smell of gun oil. It clings to everything it touches, soaking deep into the fibers of my clothes, the lining of my backpack, the coarse hair on the back of my hands. Yet here I am, kneeling on the cracked linoleum of our mudroom, a Remington 308 laid across my thighs, and the stench of gun oil sharp in my nostrils. The early morning light barely scratches at the edges of the blinds, dim and gray like the belly of a dead fish. My dad Frank is in the kitchen, clattering around with the coffee pot and mumbling under his breath. Today we're heading up to the woods of northern Michigan, same as we did every year before Leah, before we lost her. I can't help but feel the old scars throbbing as I load bullets into the magazine. It's been 10 years since that hunting trip, the one that tore my family into before and after. Before, when Leah's laughter was a constant soundtrack to our lives. After, when every silence was filled with her absence. We were just kids back then. I was 10, Leah was 8. It was supposed to be a typical hunting trip, one of those bonding experiences Dad was always talking about. But things went wrong. We got separated from Dad somehow. One minute we were following him, the next we were lost, the dense woods closing in around us. Dad says when he found me, I was huddled under a fallen tree, my eyes wide, my body frozen. All I could mutter through chattering teeth was, "Dogman." It was only later, after the search parties had combed through every thicket and hollow, that they found her. What remained of Leah was barely recognizable, the evidence of a brutal mauling undeniable. The authorities concluded it was likely a bear attack, but Dad, he never accepted that explanation. He had seen the tracks, too large and oddly shaped for any bear. As I load another round, the memory flashes, unbidden and unwelcome. Large, hairy-clawed hands reaching out towards us, impossibly big, grotesque in their form. Yet, the rest of the creature eludes me, a shadow just beyond the edge of my recall, leaving me with nothing but fragmented terrors and Leah's haunting, echoing screams. My mind blocked most of it out, a self-defense mechanism, I guess. For years after that day, sleep was a battleground. I'd wake up in strange places, kitchen floor, backyard, even at the edge of the nearby creek. My therapist said it was my mind's way of trying to resolve the unresolved, to wander back through the woods searching for Leah. But all I found in those sleepless nights was a deeper sense of loss. It took time, a lot of therapy and patience I didn't know I had, but the sleepwalking did eventually stop. I guess I started to find some semblance of peace. I have mostly moved on with my life. The fragmentary memories of that day are still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, but they don't dominate my thoughts like they used to. I just finished my sophomore year at Michigan State, majoring in environmental science. As for Dad, the loss of Leah broke him. He became a shell of himself. It destroyed his marriage with Mom. He blamed himself for letting us out of his sight, for not protecting Leah. His life took on a single consuming focus, finding the creature that killed her. He read every book, every article on cryptids and unexplained phenomena. He mapped sightings, connected dots across blurry photos and shaky testimonies of the dogman. But as the 10th anniversary of Leah's death approaches, Dad's obsession has grown more intense. He started staying up late, poring over his maps and notes, muttering to himself about patterns and cycles. He's convinced that the dogman reappears every 10 years, and this is our window of opportunity to finally hunt it down. I'm not nearly as convinced. The whole dogman thing seems like a coping mechanism, a way for Dad to channel his guilt and grief into something tangible, something he can fight against. But decided to tag along on this trip, partly to keep an eye on him, partly because a small part of me hopes that maybe, just maybe, we'll find some kind of closure out there in the woods. I finished loading the rifle and set it aside, standing up to stretch my legs. I wipe my greasy hands on an old rag, trying to get rid of the smell. The early morning light is starting to seep into the room, casting long shadows across the floor. Dad comes out of the kitchen with 2 thermoses of coffee in hand. His eyes are bleary and tired. "You ready, Ryan?" he asks, handing me a thermos, his voice rough from too many sleepless nights. "Yeah, I'm ready," I reply, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We load our gear into the truck, the weight of our supplies and weapons a physical reminder of the burden we carry. The drive from Lansing across the lower peninsula is long and quiet, the silence between us filled with unspoken memories and unresolved grief. The drive north is a blur of highway lines and the dull hum of the engine. I drift off, the landscape outside into a haze. In my sleep, fragments of that day with Leah replay like scattered pieces of a puzzle. I see her smile, the way she tugged at my sleeve, eager to explore. The sunlight filters through the trees in sharp, jagged streaks. Then the memory shifts, darker, disjointed. Leah's voice echoes, a playful laugh turning into a scream that pierces the air. The crunch of leaves underfoot as something heavy moves through the underbrush. I see a shadow, large and looming, not quite fitting the shapes of any creature I know. Then something darker creeps into the dream, something I've never allowed myself to remember clearly. Before I can see what it is, I wake up with a start as the truck jerks slightly on a rough patch of road. Dad glances over. "Bad dream?" he asks. I nod, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, the remnants of the dream clinging to me like the cold. "Yeah, just thinking about Leah," I manage to say. As we drive, Dad attempts to bridge the silence with small talk. He asks about my finals, my plans for the summer, anything to keep the conversation going. His voice carries a forced cheerfulness, but it's clear his heart isn't in it. I respond when necessary, my answers brief, my gaze fixed on the passing scenery. The landscape changes as we head further north, from flat expanses to rolling hills dotted with dense patches of forest. It's beautiful country, the kind that reminds you how vast and wild Michigan can be, but today it just feels oppressive, like it's closing in on us. We finally arrive at the cabin, nestled deep in the woods, its weathered wood blending seamlessly with the surrounding trees. The place hasn't changed much since the last time I was here, a relic from another time, filled with the echoes of our past. I can still see Leah running around the porch, her laughter ringing out into the forest. Dad parks the truck and we step out into the crisp air. The smell of pine and damp earth fills my nostrils. We start unloading our gear, the tension between us palpable. "Let's get this inside," Dad says, his voice gruff as he hefts a duffel bag onto his shoulder. I nod, grabbing my own bag and following him to the cabin. Inside, it's a mix of old and new, the same rustic furniture, but with new hunting gear and maps strewn across the table. Dad's obsession is evident in every corner of the room, a constant reminder of why we're here. As we unpack, we exchange strained attempts at normalcy. He talks about the latest cryptid sightings he's read about, his eyes lighting up with a fervor that both worries and saddens me. "Did you hear about the sighting up near Alpena?" he asks, laying out his maps on the table. "Yeah, you mentioned it," I reply, trying to muster some enthusiasm. "Do you really think there's something to it?" Dad's eyes meet mine, and for a moment I see a flicker of doubt, but it's quickly replaced by grim determination. I have to believe it, Ryan. It's the only thing that makes sense. We finish unpacking, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing minute. I step outside to clear my head, the cool air a welcome relief. The sun is starting to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. I can't shake the feeling of unease. "You can take the upstairs room," Dad mutters. His voice is strained, trying to sound normal, but it's clear the weight of the past is heavy on him. I nod, hauling my backpack up the creaking stairs to the small bedroom that I used to share with Leah. The room feels smaller now, or maybe I've just grown too much since those innocent days. I unpack silently, setting my things aside. The bed is stiff and cold under my touch. As I settle in, I can't help but glance at the corner where Leah and I would huddle together, whispering secrets and making plans for adventures that would never happen. I push the thoughts away, focusing on the practicalities of unpacking. After settling in, I go back downstairs to find Dad loading up a backpack with supplies for our hunt. The intensity in his eyes is palpable, his hands moving with practiced precision. I know this routine. It's one he's perfected over countless solo trips since that fateful day. "We'll head out early," he says, not looking up from his task. "Gotta make the most of the daylight." I nod, though unease curls in my stomach. I'm not just worried about what we might find or not find out there. I'm worried about him. Each year, the obsession seems to carve him out a bit more, leaving less of the Dad I knew. The morning air is sharp with the scent of pine and wet earth as Dad and I head into the deeper parts of the forest. The terrain is rugged, familiar in its untamed beauty, but there's a tension between us that makes the landscape feel alien. Dad moves with a purposeful stride, his eyes scanning the woods around us, Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush seems to draw his attention. He's on edge, and it puts me on edge too. As we walk, my mind drifts back to that day 10 years ago. I can almost hear Leah's voice echoing through the trees, her high-pitched call as she darted ahead. "Catch me, Ryan!" I remember how the sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows on the ground. Those memories are so vivid, so tangible, it feels like I could just turn a corner and see her there, waiting for us. Dad suddenly stops and kneels, examining the ground. He points out a set of tracks that are too large for a deer with an unusual gait pattern. "It's been here, Rye. I'm telling you, it's close," he whispers, a mixture of excitement and something darker in his voice. I nod, though I'm not sure what to believe. Part of me wants to dismiss it all as grief-fueled obsession, but another part, the part that heard Leah's scream and saw something monstrous in the woods that day, isn't so sure. As we continue, Dad's comments become increasingly cryptic. "You know, they say the dogman moves in cycles, drawn to certain places, certain times. Like it's tied to the land itself," he muses, more to himself than to me. His fixation on the creature has always been intense, but now it borders on mania. We set up a makeshift blind near a clearing where Dad insists the creature will pass. Hours drag by with little to see but the occasional bird or distant deer. The sun rises higher in the sky, casting long, slender shadows through the dense canopy. I shift uncomfortably in my spot, the forest floor hard and unyielding beneath me. My eyes dart between the trees, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, to break the monotony. Dad, on the other hand, remains steadfast, his gaze fixed on the tree line as if he can will the dogman into existence by sheer force of will. A bird chirps nearby, startling me. I sigh and adjust my grip on the rifle. I glance over at Dad. "Anything?" I ask, more out of boredom than genuine curiosity. "Not yet," he replies, his voice tight. "But it's out there. I know it." I nod, even though I'm not sure I believe him. The forest seems too quiet, too still. Maybe we're chasing ghosts. As the sun begins its descent, the forest is bathed in a warm, golden light. The air cools, and a breeze rustles the leaves. I shiver, more from anticipation than the cold. The long hours of sitting and waiting are starting to wear on me. "Let's call it a day for now," Dad says finally, his voice heavy with disappointment. "We'll head back to the cabin, get some rest, and try again tomorrow." I stand and stretch, feeling the stiffness in my muscles. We pack up our gear in silence and start the trek back to the cabin. The walk is long and quiet. The only sounds are the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. Dinner is a quiet affair, both of us lost in our thoughts. I try to make small talk, asking Dad about his plans for tomorrow, but it feels forced. We clean up in silence. After dinner, I retreat to the small bedroom. The fatigue from the day's hike has settled into my bones, but sleep still feels like a distant hope. I lie down, staring at the ceiling, the room cloaked in darkness, save for the sliver of moonlight creeping through the window. Downstairs, I hear the faint sound of Dad moving around, likely unable to sleep himself. I drift into sleep, but it's not restful. My dreams pull me back to that fateful day in the woods. Leah's voice is clear and vibrant, her laughter echoing through the trees. She looks just as she did then, bright-eyed and full of life, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she runs ahead of me. "Come on, Rye, you can't catch me," she taunts, her voice playful and teasing. I chase after her, but the scene shifts abruptly. The sky darkens, the woods around us growing dense and foreboding. Leah's laughter fades, replaced by a chilling silence. I see her ahead, standing still, her back to me. "Leah," I call out, my voice trembling. She turns slowly, her eyes wide and filled with fear. "Ryan, you have to remember," she says, her voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't what you think. You need to know the truth." Leah's words hang in the air, cryptic and unsettling. Before I can respond, she turns and starts running again, her figure becoming a blur among the trees. Panic rises in my chest as I sprint after her, my feet pounding against the forest floor. "Leah, wait!" I shout, desperation lacing my voice. The forest around me seems to close in, the trees towering and twisted, shadows dancing menacingly in the dim light. I push forward, trying to keep her in sight, but she's too fast, slipping away like a wisp of smoke. Suddenly, there's a rustle, a flash of movement in the corner of my vision. Leah screams, a sound that pierces through the heavy silence. It happens too quickly. I can't see what it is, only a dark blur that snatches her up. Leah! I scream, my voice breaking. I stumble, falling to my knees as the forest spins around me. My heart races, and the terror is so real, so visceral, that it pulls me back to that awful day, the one that changed everything. I jolt awake, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I sit up, wiping the cold sweat from my forehead as I try to steady my breathing. The room is still dark, the shadows cast by the moonlight seem to flicker and dance on the walls. My heart is still racing from the nightmare, the echo of Leah's scream lingering in my ears. As I struggle to calm down, the floorboards outside my room creak. The door opens slowly, and I see the silhouette of my dad in the doorway, a Bowie knife in his hand, his posture tense. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" I whisper, my voice shaking. "Shh," he hisses, holding up a hand to silence me. "I heard something. Something moving around in the cabin. Stay quiet." I swallow hard, my mouth dry. I glance at the clock on the nightstand. It's just past 3 in the morning. The cabin is silent, the kind of deep, oppressive silence that makes every small sound seem louder. I can't hear anything out of the ordinary, but Dad's expression is deadly serious. He motions for me to get up, and I do, moving as quietly as I can. My heart is racing, a mix of lingering fear from the dream and the sudden, sharp anxiety of the present moment. Dad leads the way, stepping cautiously out of the bedroom and into the hallway, the knife held ready in front of him. We move through the cabin, checking each room in turn. The living room is empty, the furniture casting long shadows in the dim moonlight. The kitchen is just as we left it, the plates from dinner still drying on the counter. Everything seems normal, untouched. We finish our sweep of the cabin without finding anything amiss. The silence is heavy, punctuated only by our soft footfalls. I can see the tension in Dad's frame, his grip on the knife unwavering. After checking the last room, we pause in the dimly lit hallway, the air thick with unspoken questions. "There's nothing here," I say, my voice low. "Are you sure you heard something?" He looks at me, his eyes searching for something in my face. "I heard growling, deep and close. It was right outside the window. Maybe it was just an animal outside, a raccoon or something?" I suggest, although the certainty in his voice makes me doubt my own reassurance. "No, it wasn't like that. It was different," he insists, his voice tense. I nod, not wanting to argue, but the seeds of worry are planted deep. The look in his eyes sends a chill down my spine. It's not just fear, it's desperation. The kind of desperation that comes from years of chasing shadows and finding nothing. I can see the toll this hunt has taken on him, the way it's worn him down, turned him into a man I barely recognize. We head back to our rooms. As I lie down, my mind races with thoughts of my dad. I can't help but wonder if he's losing it, if the years of grief and guilt have finally pushed him over the edge. Dad wasn't always like this. Before Leah's death, he was the kind of father who took us fishing, helped with homework, and told terrible jokes that made us groan and laugh at the same time. He was solid, dependable. But losing Leah changed him. The guilt twisted him into someone I barely recognize, someone driven by a need for answers, for closure that may never come. I try to sleep, but my thoughts keep me awake. I can hear Dad moving around downstairs, probably pacing or double-checking the locks. His paranoia has become a constant presence, and I don't know how to help him. I don't even know if I can help him. The next morning, the sunlight filters weakly through the cabin windows, casting a pale light that does little to lift the heavy mood. I drag myself out of bed, feeling the exhaustion of another restless night. Dad is already up, hunched over his maps at the kitchen table, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Morning," I mumble, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as I pour myself a cup of coffee. "Did you sleep at all?" He shakes his head, not looking up from his notes. "Not much. I couldn't stop thinking about what I heard last night." I sip my coffee, trying to shake off the remnants of my nightmare. "Maybe it was just an animal, Dad. We're deep in the woods, after all." He finally looks up, his eyes intense. "Ryan, I know what I heard. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else." I sigh, not wanting to argue. "Okay, fine, Dad. What's the plan for today?" "We're going back out. I found some tracks yesterday, and I want to follow them. See where they lead." I nod, feeling a mix of apprehension and resignation. I can see how much this means to him, how desperate he is for any kind of lead. "All right, let's get packed and head out." We spend the morning preparing, loading up our gear, and double-checking our supplies. Dad is meticulous, going over everything with a fine-tooth comb. I try to match his focus, but my mind keeps drifting back to Leah and the dream I had. Her words echo in my head, cryptic and unsettling. You need to know the truth. We set off into the woods, the air crisp and cool. The forest is alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, but it all feels distant, like background noise to the tension between us. Dad leads the way, his eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the tracks he found yesterday. As we walk, I can't help but notice how erratically he's acting. He mutters to himself, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to jump out at us. His grip on his rifle is tight, his knuckles white. "Dad, are you okay?" I ask, trying to keep my voice steady. He glances at me, his expression unreadable. "I'm fine, just focused." He stops frequently to examine the ground or the bark of trees, pointing out marks and signs that seem meaningless to me. "Look at this," he says, crouching down to examine a broken branch. "See how it snapped? That's not a deer or a bear. That's something bigger, stronger." I crouch next to Dad, squinting at the broken branch. To me, it just looks like a regular broken branch, the kind you see all over the forest. "I don't know, Dad. It just looks like a branch to me," I say, trying to keep my voice neutral. Dad's eyes flicker with frustration. "You're not looking close enough. It's the way it's snapped. Too clean, too deliberate. Something did this." I nod, not wanting to argue. "Okay, sure. But even if you're right, it could be anything. A storm, another hunter." His expression hardens. "I know what I'm looking for. This is different." I sigh, feeling the weight of the past and the tension between us pressing down on me. "Dad, I had a dream last night about Leah." The words hang in the air between us, heavy and fraught with unspoken emotions. Dad's eyes widen and he straightens up, his entire demeanor shifting. "What kind of dream? What did you see?" His voice is urgent, almost desperate. "It was strange. We were in the woods, like we are now, but everything felt different. Leah was there, running ahead of me, laughing. Then she stopped and told me I needed to know the truth, that it wasn't what I thought." Dad grabs my shoulders, his grip tight. "What else did she say? Did she tell you anything specific? Anything about the creature?" I shake my head, feeling a chill run down my spine. "No, that was it. She just said I needed to know the truth, and then she was gone." Dad's grip on my shoulders tightens, and his eyes bore into mine with a mixture of desperation and hope. "Ryan, you have to try to remember. Think hard. What did the creature look like? Did you see anything else?" I pull back slightly, uneasy with his intensity. "Dad, I told you. I don't remember. It was just a dream, a nightmare, really. My mind's probably just mixing things up." He lets go of me and runs a hand through his hair, looking frustrated and lost. "Dreams can be important. They can hold memories we've buried deep. Please, try to remember. This could be a sign, a clue." I rub my temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. "I've tried, okay? I've tried for years to piece together what happened that day. But it's all just fragments, like pieces of a puzzle that don't fit. The dream, it felt real, but I don't think it's telling me anything new." Dad's face falls and he looks older than I've ever seen him. He turns away, staring into the forest as if it holds all the answers. As we make our way back to the cabin, the sun begins to set, casting long shadows through the trees. The air grows colder, and I shiver, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Dad is silent, lost in his thoughts, his face drawn and haggard. Back at the cabin, we unload our gear once again in silence. Dad disappears into his room, muttering something about going over his notes. I decide to explore the cabin, hoping to find something that might help me understand what's going on with him. In the attic, I find a box of old family photos and documents. As I sift through the contents, I come across a worn journal with Dad's handwriting on the cover. Curiosity gets the better of me, and I open it, flipping through the pages. The journal is filled with notes and sketches, detailing his obsession with the dogman. But there's something else. Entries that talk about Leah, about that day in the woods. His handwriting becomes more erratic, the words harder to read. One entry stands out, dated just a few days after Leah's death. June 15th, 2013. It was supposed to be a normal trip. "Keep them close, Frank," I kept telling myself. But I failed. Leah is gone, and it's my fault. I heard her scream, saw the shadows. I tried to get to her, but The thing, it was there. Too fast, too strong. My hands, blood everywhere. No one will believe me. I can't even believe myself. I have to find it. I have to protect Ryan. I have to make it right. God, what have I done? Before I can read further, the attic door creaks open, and Dad's voice slices through the stillness. What are you doing up here? His tone is sharp, almost panicked. I turn to see him standing in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide with something between anger and fear. I clutch the journal to my chest, my mind racing. I found this, I was just trying to understand. In an instant, he crosses the room and snatches the journal from my hands. His grip is tight, his knuckles white. You had no right, he growls, his voice trembling. Dad, I just wanted to know the truth. I shout, frustration boiling over. What really happened to Leah? His eyes flash with a mix of rage and anguish, and before I can react, he slaps me across the face. The force of it knocks me off balance, and I stumble backward, my cheek stinging. For a moment, there's a stunned silence. We both stand there, breathing hard, the air thick with tension. I'm sorry, Dad says finally, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to. He trails off, taking the journal to his chest like a lifeline. I touch my cheek, feeling the heat from the slap, and take a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Dad, what aren't you telling me? What really happened that day? Stay out of it, Ryan, Dad growls, his eyes dark with anger. You don't know what you're messing with. He turns and storms out of the attic. I'm left standing there, my cheek throbbing, my mind racing. What the fuck is going on? What really happened to Leah? And what is Dad so afraid of? That night, I sleep with my rifle within arm's reach, more afraid of my dad than any dogman. The slap still burns on my cheek, and the look in his eyes, rage, fear, something darker, haunts me. I lie awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the old cabin, every sound amplified in the stillness. Eventually, exhaustion pulls me under, and I fall into a restless sleep. The dream returns, vivid and unsettling. I'm back in the woods, chasing after Leah. Her laughter echoes through the trees, a haunting reminder of happier times. This time, though, I push myself harder, refusing to let her slip away. Ryan, catch me, she calls, her voice playful. I'm coming, Leah, I shout, my legs pumping, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest around us is a twisted, shadowy maze, the trees seeming to close in on us. Leah's figure becomes clearer, her blonde hair catching the dim light filtering through the canopy. She stops suddenly, turning to face me, her eyes wide with fear. Leah, what is it? I ask, my voice trembling. Look behind you, she whispers, her voice barely audible. I turn slowly, dread creeping up my spine. In the shadows, I see a figure, its form indistinct and shifting. It's not quite animal, not quite human, something in between. The sight of it sends a jolt of terror through me, and I wake up with a start, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I'm not in my bed. The ground beneath me is cold and hard, the smell of damp earth filling my nostrils. Panic rises as I realize I've sleepwalked into the woods. I scramble to my feet, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The moon casts a pale glow over the surroundings, revealing what looks like a long-abandoned animal lair. The walls are covered in giant claw marks, deep gouges in the wood and earth. The air is heavy with the scent of decay, and a chill runs through me. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Carefully, I start to move, my eyes scanning the ground, desperate for a familiar landmark. That's when I see them. Faded scraps of fabric caught on the jagged edges of the underbrush. My steps falter, a sense of dread washing over me as I bend down to examine them. The fabric is torn, weathered by time and the elements, but unmistakably familiar. It's part of Leah's jacket, the bright pink one she wore on the day she disappeared. As I strain to make sense of it all, a rustling sound behind me snaps my focus. My heart leaps into my throat. I spin around, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle I don't have, because, of course, I didn't bring it in my unconscious state. The shadowy figure that emerges from the trees is unsettlingly familiar, mirroring the menacing forms of my nightmares. But as it steps into the moonlight, I recognize the worn jacket, the weary posture. It's Dad! Ryan! He calls out, his voice a mix of relief and stern concern. I've been looking everywhere for you. What the hell are you doing out here? I exhale slowly, the terror ebbing away as reality sets back in. I don't know, Dad. I must have sleepwalked again. My voice is shaky, my earlier dream still clinging to the edges of my consciousness. Dad stares at me in disbelief. You haven't sleepwalked since you were a kid, Rye. This isn't just a coincidence. His eyes dart around, taking in the surroundings, the eerie, claw-marked den, the unsettling quiet of the woods. How did you even find this place? I shake my head, struggling to find an answer. I don't know, Dad. I woke up here. The uncertainty in my voice does nothing to ease the tension. His eyes lock onto the tattered remains of Leah's jacket in my hands, and something inside him snaps. The color drains from his face as he stumbles a few steps backward. This is where it happened, he murmurs, his voice barely a whisper. This is where we found Leah. I thought you said you don't remember anything from that night, he says accusingly. I swear, Dad, I don't know anything about this place, I insist, my own heart pounding. It was you, wasn't it? You've been hiding this from me. His voice is frantic. You? Last night, the growling, it was you. His voice rises, tinged with hysteria. I step back, my pulse racing, feeling the chill of the night and the weight of his accusation. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. No, he interrupts, his voice breaking as he points a trembling finger at me. You knew. You always knew. It was you, Ryan. All these years, the evidence was right there, but I refused to see it. You were the dogman. You killed Leah. His words hit me like a physical blow, absurd and horrifying in their implications. Dad, you're not making any sense. You're talking crazy. I was just a little kid. How could I? I protest, my voice shaky. He steps closer, his presence looming over me, the outline of his figure distorted by the shadows of the trees. Think about it. It all makes sense now. You led us here, to this place, because you remember. Because you did it. Dad, stop it, I shout, my heart pounding in my chest. You're scaring me. You need help, professional help. This isn't you. But he's beyond reason, his eyes wild with a haunted grief. I have to end this, he mutters, more to himself than to me, his hand tightening around his rifle. His finger hovers dangerously over the trigger of his rifle. My instincts kick in, and I know I have to act fast. I lunge toward him, trying to knock the weapon away, but he's quicker than I expected. We struggle, our breaths heavy in the cold night air, the sounds of our scuffle, the only noise in the otherwise silent woods. His strength surprises me, fueled by his frantic emotions. He shoves me back, and I stumble over a root, my balance lost for a crucial second. That's all he needs. He raises his rifle, his intentions clear in his wild, pained eyes. I dive to the ground just as the shot rings out, a deafening blast that echoes ominously through the trees. The bullet whizzes past, narrowly missing me, embedding itself in the bark of an old pine. I scramble to my feet, my heart pounding in my ears, and I start running. The underbrush claws at my clothes and skin, but I push through, driven by a primal urge to survive. Dad! Stop! It's me, Ryan! I shout back as I dodge between the trees. Another shot breaks the silence, closer this time, sending splinters of wood flying from a nearby tree trunk. It's surreal, being hunted by my own father, a man tormented by grief and lost in his delusions. I don't stop to look back. I can hear him crashing through the forest behind me, his heavy breaths and muttered curses carried on the wind. The terrain is rough, and I'm fueled by adrenaline, but exhaustion is setting in. I need a plan. Ahead, I see a rocky outcrop and make a split-second decision to head for it. It offers a chance to hide, to catch my breath, and maybe reason with him if he catches up. As I reach the rocks, I slip behind the largest one, my body pressed tight against the cold, damp surface. I hear his footsteps approaching, slow and cautious now. As I press against the rock, trying to calm my racing heart, I can hear Dad's footsteps drawing closer, each step crunching ominously on the forest floor. He's methodical, deliberate, like a hunter stalking his prey. Come out, Ryan! Dad's voice is ragged, filled with a blend of fury and pain. My heart pounds against my chest, the cold sweat on my back making me shiver against the rough surface of the rock. I know I can't just sit here. It's only a matter of time before he finds me. Taking a deep breath, I peek around the edge of the rock, trying to gauge his position. I see him, rifle raised, scanning the area slowly. This might be my only chance to end this madness without further violence. I need to disarm him, to talk some sense into him if I can. As quietly as I can, I move out from behind the rock, my steps careful to avoid any twigs or leaves that might betray my position. I'm almost upon him when a branch snaps under my foot, a sound so trivial yet so alarmingly loud in the quiet of the woods. Dad whirls around, looking completely unhinged. "Ryan," he exclaims, his rifle swinging in my direction. Panic overtakes me, and I lunge forward, my hands reaching for the gun. We struggle, the rifle between us, our breaths heavy and erratic. "Dad, please, stop," I plead, trying to wrestle the gun away, but he's strong, stronger than I expected. In the chaos, the rifle goes off. The sound is deafening, a sharp echo that seems to reverberate off every tree around us. Pain explodes in my abdomen, sharp and burning, like nothing I've ever felt before. I stagger back, my hands instinctively going to the wound. The warmth of my own blood coats my fingers, stark and terrifying. Dad drops the rifle, his eyes wide with horror. "Oh my God, what have I done?" He gasps, rushing to my side as I collapse onto the forest floor. As the pain sears through me, a strange, overpowering energy surges within. It's wild, primal, unlike anything I've ever experienced. Looking down in horror, my hands are no longer hands, but large, hairy, clawed appendages. The transformation is rapid, consuming. My vision blurs, senses heighten, and a raw, guttural growl builds in my throat. In that moment, a flood of understanding washes over me, mingling with the horror of realization. These are the hands of the creature from my nightmares, the creature whose face I can never fully recall because, as I now understand, it is me. What happens next feels detached, as if I'm no longer in control of my own actions, watching from a distance as my body moves on its own. I turn towards my dad, his face a mask of terror. He stumbles back, his eyes wide with the dawning realization of what his son has become. The forest around us seems to fall silent, holding its breath as the strange scene unfolds. I can hear my own cries, loud and deep, filling the air with a sound that's both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. The pain in my abdomen fuels a powerful, overwhelming urge, an urge that's too strong to resist. With a determination that feels both strange and natural, I move towards him. My dad, paralyzed by fear and surprise, doesn't run. Maybe he can't. Maybe he doesn't want to leave me alone. The encounter is intense and quick, a flurry of unexpected movement and action. My dad barely puts up a struggle, as though resigned to helping me through this strange change. Everything happens in a confusing rush. My transformed state overpowers him, the surge of energy coursing through me too strong to control. When it's all over, the red haze that had clouded my vision begins to fade, and the fierce, uncontrollable energy that drove my actions subsides. I'm left standing, my breaths heavy and erratic in the eerie stillness of the forest. The transformation reverses as quickly as it came on, and I find myself back in my human form. My clothes are ripped and torn, hanging off my frame in tattered pieces. At my feet lies evidence of the confusing turn of events. Shock sets in, a numbing disbelief mixed with a gut-wrenching realization of what's happened to me. My hands, now human again, tremble as I look at them, half expecting to see the different appendages that had moved on their own, but there's only dirt and grime on my skin. I stand there for what feels like an eternity, trapped in a confusing situation of my own making. Eventually, the shock wears thin and a cold practicality takes hold. I need to get out of here. I need to find a way to explain what happened, to disappear from this place. Because who would believe this? Who would understand that I didn't choose this? That I'm not a monster by choice? With trembling hands, I do what's necessary. I bury the evidence from my strange form in a shallow grave, the physical act of digging strangely grounding. I cover them with leaves and branches, a pitiful attempt to hide the confusing turn of events. I take a moment, whispering apologies into the wind, knowing full well that nothing I say can change what happened. I leave the forest behind, my mind a whirl of dark thoughts. As I walk, the first hints of dawn brush against the horizon, the sky bleeding a soft pink. It's hauntingly beautiful.